Hello, hope everything is going well. It is a very gray afternoon, uh, gray Sunday afternoon here. Um, and I think I'm going to do a bit more of these impromptu, kind of off the cuff videos, um, just because I feel like I want to get a few things off my chest. And I think it might help to sort of test my ideas um, and send them out into the world a little bit more so that I can refine them, so that I can identify um, areas where I am on the right track and areas where um, you know people might offer some interesting rebuttals to what I have to say. So that's kind of the idea here. That's what I'm going for. Um, so the theme of this video is that acceleration is happening, whether you like it or not. That is pretty clear to me at this point. So, we'll get into what exactly that means. Um, for starters, we can talk about uh, this broader term, accelerationism, as a movement. I think it is obviously a very controversial thing. Um, I think oftentimes um, it is mischaracterized, although there are so many different flavors of accelerationism at this point. Um, Oftentimes the critique can apply to one flavor of accelerationism and not another. Um, so there is that, but let's just kind of unpack the basics. I mean, in its most basic form, accelerationism is the idea that the only way to really address or even you know uh, possibly cause the collapse of the capitalist system uh, is really to speed up than to resist the intensification of uh, the contradictions that occur within a capitalist system. So, in other words, if you think the current system is broken and inherently exploitative, as a lot of leftists do, accelerationism argues that you shouldn't try to slow that down or reform it from within the system. Instead, you should lean into it and amplify its contradictions so that it becomes completely unsustainable and eventually implodes, and that will pave the way for something new. This is a very simplistic explanation of the accelerationist perspective. So I'm kind of glossing over a lot of the finer details, but that's kind of like the basic idea here. And accelerationism, as I said before, has a lot of different flavors, but like in my mind, there are two main camps, and the rest are just kind of footnotes. So there's right accelerationism, which is sees the collapse or intensification of capitalism as inevitable, possibly desirable, and advocates for a kind of almost neo-feudal system to emerge um, that would be sort of like a intense, rigid hierarchical system. So right accelerationists might view this the chaos created by capitalism as a sort of feature, not a bug, um, and um, they might assume that intensifying technological progress and even intensifying social inequalities will lead to like a more efficient order. Um, so this strain of thought can get pretty nihilistic. Viewing collapse as a kind of like uh, natural selection process. I kind of think of right accelerationism almost along the lines of people who espouse social Darwinism, right? So survival of the fittest applied to human society, which is a pretty sick, depraved, antisocial way to think. So, as you can tell, I'm not a right-wing accelerationist. Shocker. Um, so, I think we need to articulate what left accelerationism is, with the understanding that, you know, uh, a left accelerationist is not going to advocate for rigid hierarchies and things along those lines. So, like, left accelerationism um, posits that harnessing advanced technologies and pushing capitalist contradictions to the absolute extreme. Um, by doing this, we can kind of accelerate towards a post-capitalist future. Um, so it's not just like an ethos of breaking things um, for its own sake. It's about using technology and other tools to sort of catalyze a potentially a more equitable system beyond capitalism, something that could include universal welfare, um, wealth redistribution, um, full automation of the economy. Um, in in essence, the idea is to kind of reduce socially necessary labor time to the point where your average person doesn't have to work very hard. Um, that's kind of the dream, right? Um, so yeah, those are kind of the two different camps in my mind. Um, there is this kind of this new movement called effective accelerationism, which I think is kind of a joke because it's really just like a status quo politics that I'm not particularly impressed by. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you're either a left wing accelerationist or a right wing accelerationist. Um, and you know, it, it's in other words, if you believe accelerationism is uh, the correct position, you're either going to fall on the left or the right uh, of the spectrum, and everything else is just kind of a superfluous descriptor, right? Um, so accelerationism is pretty controversial because it openly questions whether resistance, reform, ethical regulations, um, whether these things are actually worth pursuing. So to critics, it can kind of sound reckless and irresponsible, and even dangerous, since accelerationism appears to celebrate the very crises and inequalities that most people want to mitigate. But for an accelerationist, the crisis is the point. So, like, only by going to extremes, they would argue, can we actually break out of the cycle that capitalism is perpetuating? So, yeah, accelerationism isn't just like faster is better. It's about seeing acceleration as a way to sort of force a reckoning with it within our system, and kind of, you know, most people on the left, anti-capitalists, will argue that the present system is unsustainable. Um, and so I think the accelerationist argument is sort of like, yes, that's true. And so let's just try to pull off the band-aid as quickly as possible because it is unsustainable, and the sooner we can drive it to collapse, the sooner we can figure out an alternative system that will work better for everybody. I think that might be kind of an idealist conception of the way an accelerationist would think, but um, I'm trying to speak in simple terms just for the purpose of explaining the basics right now. But yeah, like the bottom line is acceleration is happening whether we like it or not. Trump was just elected again, um, and it's um, I think it is entirely possible that there's going to be a lot of deregulation going on. Specifically, I'm interested in the way that the tech industry might be affected by this. Um, yeah, I mean, the fact is, like, the machinery is in motion, um, the system has its own logic. Capitalism operates by its own logic, and it's kind of operates independently of what any one uh, individual actor or agent in the system desires per se. So it's in motion and it doesn't really care whether we like the destination or not. The entire system is sort of driven by capitalist demands to innovate, optimize, outperform. Um, that's how capitalism works by constantly revolutionizing the means of production every time there's a crisis. Um, it's sort of able to adapt to whatever the crisis, uh, whatever the particular crisis is that emerged. It's sort of able to change itself and adapt based on that. And in some sense, um, that's kind of the brilliance of capitalism, right? But this idea that like we're spiraling um, uh, at such a pace, we're spiraling at such a pace that like stopping is not so much as an option as it is a fantasy at this point. Um, so what makes it almost like diabolical is how every advancement claims to make things easier for us. You know, we can think of automation, productivity hacks, AI. Um, but often, what does it actually end up doing? You know, um, there's more data fed into the system. There's faster decision cycles. Um, Timelines become compressed for how long it takes to get things done. But then that means more work. That just means more work is piled onto us as the working class. So I think that is a big problem. Is that theoretically this technology, specifically, I'm talking about like LLMs, and just the broader AI ecosystem. This stuff should be reducing socially necessary labor time, and that should be a good thing. But in present conditions, with capitalism working the way it does, that actually drives companies to want to exploit workers even more, um, because you know that's that's um, that's how the system works. You know, um, and the irony is, the more we resist or try to slow this down, the more we're really just swept up in this like bizarre momentum that's occurring. So it is like a feedback loop where every point at which you say no to acceleration, it only it ends up strengthening the system's drive uh, to prove why yes is inevitable, if that makes sense. So like our resistance doesn't stop the machine. Um, it's kind of absorbed into it and repackaged and sold back to us. Um, let's also not forget the fact that acceleration isn't just about like pace; it's about depth. So the convergence of uh, tech, the tech industry, technology in general, politics, and the personal lives of everybody. Um, this is all converging into a singularity. Um, like it's affecting every aspect of reality. So the real question is, at what point does acceleration stop being some external force and become like the core of what it means to live in the 21st century? And if we are already there, which I think there's a good case to be made, if we are already there, then resisting it might mean embracing it in ways that we haven't fully thought out yet. What I do know is that Luddism is not the answer. You know, good old fashioned machine smashing is a pretty tempting knee jerk reaction to runaway technological advancement, but it's about as effective as using a baseball bat to stop a tidal wave. You know, so in its heyday, Luddism was an attempt to stop machines from undercutting skilled labor and thereby, you know, undermining livable wages. So it was a reaction against a specific form of exploitation tied to this newly emerging industrial capitalism. Back when you know, smashing a loom actually meant disrupting something kind of tangible. Now, though, tech isn't just the loom in the corner of the factory. It's uh, woven into this entire structure of society, from finance to healthcare, um, and how we define work in general. Uh, Even if you could somehow unplug every computer, you would still be dealing with a society that's completely restructured itself around tech-driven productivity and data flows and instant connectivity. Um, so it's almost kind of like the underlying operating system of capitalism at this point, and you know, so uh, you cannot stop this. This is not something that you can simply turn off. It's that's not going to work. That type of thinking is a dead end. Um, and there's another issue as well, which is that Luddites were fighting machines that directly impacted their livelihoods. But today we're all dealing with far more subtle, uh, the more insidious impacts of technology surveillance, um, data exploitation, uh, you know, the attention economy, um, and look, at a certain point, and like I've heard the argument made that like AI is not going to replace people's jobs; it's just going to make people more efficient. And it's like, well, okay, but if the average worker is now more productive, then that means there is a need for less workers. So that means job displacement. Um, yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at is, um, if you try disengaging or like shutting this off, you're alienated from everybody else because everybody else is tied into this technology in various ways. So Luddism and Luddites and the call to kind of you know, um, to even entertain this, you're not meeting the moment. Um, the moment calls for a deeper structural reimagining of ownership and control over technology. Um, if it's inevitable that AI and automation will continue to encroach, then the only way to meet the moment is to shift who gets to hold the reins, with respect to how this technology is used. Public ownership of AI is something I would strongly advocate. For example, um, that could be one way of turning it. from a weapon of surveillance and exploitation to a something that can generate like a sort of shared prosperity, right? Um, the other thing I want to talk about is that like this notion of unplugging. Um, Unplugging isn't the answer either. In terms of, just don't look at your phone so much, just go outside and touch grass, right? Um, it is uh, it is an appealing fantasy. I'll give it that. There's something about the idea of ditching our screens and walking into the wilderness that can feel revolutionary. The problem is it's more of an escape than a solution, right? Um, I think we just have to accept that as adults. Um, Unplugging suggests that the core problem with technology is our personal dependence on it. Like it's just a matter of willpower, that we're like too addicted to these apps. But it goes deeper than that. The reality is technology isn't just like our smartphone. It's embedded into the infrastructure of society. So even if you throw away your smartphone, the systems shaping the economy, the labor market, the political landscape, these things are all still powered by algorithms. And yeah, you can't just like unplug from that. Um, uh, Unplugging becomes little more than like a personal rebellion. Um, so it really doesn't touch the deeper problem. It might make you feel better personally, and I'm not even. Maybe you should stop looking at your phone so much, but that's a matter of self-improvement, personal self-improvement, and self-care. That's not revolutionary. That's not like that's not going to change anything. It's just going to make you personally feel better, and you know. So. Um, It also, I mean, if you completely unplug and you completely disengage, you are actually putting yourself at a disadvantage because um, if you have any kind of critical perspective whatsoever, you've now relegated yourself to the fringe, you're isolating yourself and disconnecting from any possibility of real influence. So I don't think that's the answer. Um, There's this other issue, which is unplugging feeds into a kind of like tech, like blaming the technology, um, and that distracts us from the root issue. It's not the technology itself that is inherently oppressive. It's how it's controlled, how it's structured to prioritize profit and surveillance over human needs. Um, People aren't being exploited because they're glued to screens. They're glued to screens because the world has been engineered to keep us tethered and to keep us consuming and feeding data back into the system. So if we're serious about dealing with the fallout of our tech saturated world, the solution is not to unplug, but to demand control over the technology that's shaping our lives. Um, so we have to we have to think about ownership. Um, it should be about flipping the script so that technology serves collective well-being and not just the profit motives of a few massive corporations. Um, let's get into this idea that which I think is kind of a red herring. Um, the idea that energy constraints and carbon emissions are really the thing that we should be focusing on when it comes to um, the development of AI, for example. Um, but the idea that AI is some massive singular burden when it comes to carbon emissions is not accurate. It's true that training large AI models requires substantial computational resources, But it's misleading to single out AI as if it's, like the big carbon emitter. AI models only need to be trained once to reach their initial state. And once they're trained, they're relatively efficient with far lower computational requirements during actual use. So, in other words, the heavy lifting is uh, a one-time event, not an ongoing drain per se. So, to put it in perspective, if you compared AI's energy use to the constant power demands of data centers supporting like other things like social media, video streaming, cloud storage, um, these are things that people engage with daily and they're running 24/7. Um, so, you know, our typical lifestyle as well, like regular, commuting, air travel, um, urban, urban sprawl, this all collectively racks up like a far greater carbon bill than training an AI model every few years. So the finger pointing at AI's carbon footprint, it kind of feels like a distraction. It takes attention away from the fact that the real issue isn't the technology itself, but rather the fact that our energy grid and resource allocation are completely skewed in favor of, the wealthy controlling everything. Like if the grid were um, powered by renewables, um, the question of AI's environmental impact would be dramatically different. Um, and AI, ironically, could help make that shift happen faster by optimizing energy usage um, and advancing climate models and innovating in areas like smart grids and other green tech. Um, so while it is true that AI requires substantial resources initially, framing it as uh, disproportionately burdensome kind of ignores the greater context of what's going on. The problem isn't that AI is inherently energy hungry, it's that our energy is drawn from carbon intensive resources in the first place. So rather than demonizing AI, we would do better to focus on the real challenge, which is, transitioning to clean energy systems. Um, framing energy constraints as the primary concern with AI is misleading. It makes it sound like AI's biggest problem is that it's just like too power hungry, um, that is you need to think again. I will just shift the conversation back to ownership and the structural impacts that AI is going to have on society. Um, yeah, uh, these energy costs are like small potatoes compared to how much the deeper societal consequences that we are already seeing. Um, we're talking about mass surveillance, job displacement, the erosion of privacy, um, the spread of algorithmically optimized misinformation. These issues aren't problems you can fix by making AI greener. Focusing on energy lets tech companies greenwash the issue. Um, so they can make superficial changes that address a tiny aspect of AI's footprint without actually changing how it's used or who benefits from it. Um, this energy crisis angle gives the industry a convenient scapegoat as well. It paints the picture that AI would be universally beneficial if only it weren't for these power demands. Um, yeah, so this all distracts from the real structural problem, which is that AI development is currently driven almost exclusively by profit motives, which means that AI isn't designed to benefit society as a whole. The goal isn't sustainable development or genuine societal good. Um, it's getting the next iteration out and you know, doing that faster and more efficiently, no matter what that means for labor markets. Um, so, yeah, I mean, let's be clear. If energy were genuinely an obstacle to AI, uh, it would seem that problem is already being resolved, right? Like we can talk about small nuclear modules, or rather, what is the technical term? Um, Small modular nuclear reactors, right? SMRs. Um, so the idea of using SMRs to power data centers is gaining a lot more traction, especially with like tech giants investing money into the concept. And it's not difficult to see why. Yeah, like I've acknowledged, AI and cloud computing require massive amounts of power, um, and as demand escalates, uh, the energy problem becomes both logistical and it's also just a PR headache for these companies, right? I was just talking about greenwashing the issue. Um, so, these small reactors are a pretty significant paradigm shift from traditional nuclear power. Um, Unlike large nuclear plants, which are very expensive and time-consuming to build, SMRs are designed to you can build them off-site. Um, they are, as the name implies, modularly assembled and then shipped to the location right where they're needed. So this does cut down on cost and construction time, um, and it makes it more feasible for tech companies to consider them as a power source for data centers because you can just put them right there. Um, so it's like the perfect solution for tech companies to kind of keep the ever growing data beast being feeding that beast without ever facing the backlash over carbon emissions again. Um, so it's not a surprise that they're willing to invest heavily here. But there is a darker undertone here, which is that by investing in their own energy infrastructure, um, these enormous tech companies are creating like a self-sustaining ecosystem where they are even less reliant on traditional utilities, and that makes them untouchable in a crisis. So we can imagine a scenario where data monopolies like Amazon or Google, um, they could keep their data centers running in the middle of a massive power outage. Um, so it's kind of an interesting possibility there. So this kind of, I guess you could say it's kind of a nuclear independence that they're attempting to develop here, um, and it could extend their grip on critical infrastructure and cement these quasi monopolies, um, so that they don't just dominate tech, but they also like hold a disproportionate level of autonomy when it comes to everything, society's basic needs. Um, so the other thing I want to talk about is like how can we start thinking about what to do now? Because the theme of this video is that acceleration is happening whether you like it or not, right? I think we all need to kind of come to terms with that, and then the question then becomes, what should we do about it? The corporate players in AI are certainly moving fast, and they've already hinted at locking down parts of their systems, from training to um, algorithm transparency. Um, so the stakes are high, and it's only a matter of time before they start pulling back even harder on the accessibility of these models, making it kind of uh, it's critical that we pay more attention to open source alternatives now, um, while they are still available. So the big corporations like OpenAI and Google and Meta, they have a vested interest in controlling the entire AI pipeline. Um, by locking models down, um, they can essentially dictate the terms of how AI is used across industries. And if they control the models, they control the market. Um, and what happens when they start when they're gatekeeping features and access levels, and you can keep entire use cases behind a paywall, and suddenly the open web as we know it is basically gone. And with advanced AI capabilities available only to those who can like afford a premium license, um, you know, that that doesn't bode well. That does kind of seem to imply the trajectory we're on is kind of like a neo-feudal trajectory. Um, but this is where open source LLMs come in. Um, I did mention Meta earlier, and it is true that Meta has a vested interest in controlling their AI pipeline, but they have nonetheless, um, you know, uh, their model is public. So Meta's Llama, um, and smaller local initiatives. These are more than just like curiosities. I think they are potential lifelines. Um, you know, because they provide transparency, flexibility, and like freedom from corporate oversight. Um, Open source models allow users to uh, host them locally and customize them as needed, and that way they can keep control over their own data. And there's also often they're often built with public accountability, where like the community is then allowed to inspect and improve on the code and training data, and this adds layers of trust, and adaptability that closed systems really you can't trust. Locally hosted models in particular, I believe, are a safeguard for our autonomy at this point. When you can run a model on your own hardware, you control what it does and how it's used. There's no third-party APIs, um, no algorithms dictating what's allowed. Um, and the benefits go beyond privacy. Local models allow for, customization for specific needs, like fine tuning a model to, um, you know, handle niche industry terms or unique regional languages without leaking data to some corporate server, and you don't know who's reading that data. Um, we're already seeing hints of a shift towards control and containment when it comes to LLMs. If you look at OpenAI's API terms and how they've tightened over time, or how Google is slowly walling off certain functionalities within its AI offerings. Um, if we want AI that's truly for the people, then open source LLMs and local hosting are really the only only realistic alternatives. Because once corporations fully lock down these models, retroactively opening up the tech will be impossible. Um, Embracing open source and local AI now is really our best shot at maintaining some degree of freedom and creativity and autonomy, in this strange future that we now find ourselves in. Um, and I guess I'll offer some concluding thoughts here. I think resisting these technologies uh, requires rethinking how we build and manage them. from the ground up. Because if we leave it up to these corporations, they're speeding towards a future where power and autonomy and even reality itself is private property. Yeah. Um, so I guess I'll leave it there. Um, it's kind of a meandering little talk I just gave. I know talked about a lot of things. I'll divide up this video into chapters just so it's a little bit easier to navigate because I know I've touched on a few things here. Um, would love to hear your thoughts. If you think I'm crazy, feel free to let me know. Um, and I have a Patreon. If you found this to be useful, you can support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. So you can go to patreon.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Um, I'm gonna do a few more of these kind of rambly videos, I think, just because I do find them to be um, helpful. It is helpful to get feedback on what my my line of thought and if I'm on the right track or not. Um, but at the same time, I'm gonna continue doing scripted videos as well. So I am still working on the next video. It's going to be an analysis of a work called 3D Workers Island. Very interesting stuff. I'm doing a close reading of it right now, and just I'm scrutinizing every image in that work to try and find its hidden secrets. So that is uh, that is something I will be working on. I don't know when it's going to be out. It's going to take a while to write, I think. There's a lot going on, but I'll leave you there. Yeah,